All right. Welcome to the Trade Guys, episode 35. I am your host, Melanie of Ornamental Comics at www.ornamentalcomics.com. With me today is Olivia Wiley of parmesan.webcomic.ws and Matthew Parker of border-ks.com, Border, Kansas. These fine folks are here today with me to discuss overall appropriation from both cultures, religions, different areas of the world influence us as artists, writers, creators. And this has been coming up a lot lately in webcomics, in a lot of just general discussions, Twitter, Facebook, and I thought we should go ahead and discuss this because what level is appropriate and what is not? Or is any of it appropriate? Or none at all? I mean, it's such again, a giant spectrum of gray. Well, where should you stand? Should you only stay within a very narrow area of maybe your own culture? Should you be able to even talk about other people's cultures? So that's why I went ahead and got some friends today. Figured we could give it a talk and see where the ball rolls, all right? So, guys, overall, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Matthew, you're brand new, so why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself here a little bit, since this is your very first time on the trade.
My name is Matthew Parker. I'm the author of Border, Kansas, an online web fiction that updates Tuesdays and Thursdays. I'm an attorney by training with specialty in copyright and intellectual property, and that's primarily been to try to pay the bills because what I've always wanted to do since I was as young as I can remember is write books.
Very cool. So, overall, do you think people, especially within general fiction, comics and, just writing in general, do you think they're stepping on others' toes when they appropriate or use others' ideas? Like, their culture, their religion, something like that influences them.
I think that there's no way to say blanket yes or no on whether or not something is cultural appropriation or cultural appreciation or synthesis. I think what it comes down to ultimately is the context in which it's used. I think within the world of comics especially, we can all think of characters that come from non-white, non-European backgrounds that we look at and go, that's a little much. That's set dressing, that's using it only to give an air of the exotic. I think comics have especially been bad at this with African characters and Asian characters and the Roma especially. But then on the other side of it, there are characters where those cultures are used to inform them and to play ideas against other more familiar ideas to the readers, and which are done in very appropriate and well done fashions. And I think that the one that's leading this right now is Kamala Khan, the new Ms. Marvel.
Yes, very much so.
Who I believe her writer is herself, or one of the writers is a Muslim American woman. But obviously, as a comic book character, this is someone that could be handled by a number of different people over her lifetime as a character. And I think that given that background as Pakistani American and as Muslim American is used to show a respect for the culture and also the challenges facing not just a person but a superhero from that background, it's done in a way that furthers cultural exchange versus adopting it only to appeal to Orientalism or the prurient interests or differentness.
I definitely agree. A lot of times, the use of culture, skin, religion, is not just to always point at otherness, but always also to use it. For instance, Superman. Superman technically uses that otherness, being an outsider. Clark Kent, his secret, his alter ego there is technically his mask, so that way he can blend into current culture. But he is the other, by all technical standards. So I mean, there's always more than one side to that little coin there. It's not, like we keep emphasizing, it's very gray. It's a very gray area. And you had pointed out a good article there from Salon, why I can't stand white belly dancers, and I'll provide links down in the doobly-doo for everybody, so that they can see all these different articles we discuss. But it screams at me that people don't seem to understand that we've borrowed from each other for eons. As much cross-culture and cross-religions and whatnot as there has been, one has always borrowed at one point or another, or even fully taken over from another, I mean, how many pagan holidays does it take for you to point out the fact that the bunny, for instance, in Easter was from Babylonian origins, talking about fertility gods, bunnies representing a very large amount of fertility, and its overall symbology of that's definitely not Christian. I mean, it's just there's always been borrowing, and I think, especially nowadays, now that we are more aware of it, we could do it with more respect. But I don't think that should stop us from necessarily borrowing, at all.
That excited about the topic, are you?
Say that again, hon?
I said, that excited about the topic, are you?
Oh, yeah. So excited.
Well, and I think that if looking at our history, we have algebra because of mathematicians out of the Middle East. We go to movies and we watch about movies about Greek gods and European fairy tales, and Pixar is coming out with a film either next year or the year after about Polynesian fairy tales. There is so much to do when we can approach other cultural backgrounds in a respectful fashion and use them to show both difference and commonality. In literature, the one that I think of when I think of that is The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan, where he took a huge number of very different cultures and changed them and blended them to come up with the cultures that existed in his world. There's very European, English, and French influences, but there's also very clear Chinese and Japanese influences as well. And because no one culture ultimately is treated as being superior, the main characters learn things from even the most outsider cultures in that world in the end. It doesn't come off as appropriation, it comes off as reinterpretation.
And I think the power of this, when done right, goes back to human psychology. It's the psychology of socialization. When a human being sees something for the first time, their first reaction, way down deep in our brainstem, is, that's scary, that's different. But if we see it on a regular basis in a good light, we start to accept, and we start to make it part of our worldview, and we no longer see it as the other. So when we show characters and we show cultures in an interesting new light, they're no longer strange and other. And that's what we should be shooting for as creators, as readers, is the works that bring people into a point where they can socialize better, where they can accept other things much better. And the scary thing is that this work also can do the exact opposite. Some great examples are Happy Hooligan, if your grandparents ever had that one from back in the day, or if you remember or have ever seen the original old Crimson Flash, the Flash before he cleaned up his act.
Yeah.
If you remember Butler, Mr. Crimson. Yeah, that was society's views, society's most negative views during wartime, acting on cultural appropriation. Essentially, they were just taking a funny accent and a funny face and sticking it on a character to make people laugh. That is cultural appropriation. That is a creative sin to me. It's when you just go, oh, that's cute, or that's going to make somebody laugh. We should use it. That's cultural appropriation. So I'll leave that there for whoever's interested in it.
Well, I got into this discussion about appropriation specifically. I have emphasized in previous podcasts that I live here in the Southwest, specifically in the Four Corners area of New Mexico. Giant melting pot area, but the main two cultural influences are Native American and Hispanic. And both are heavily influenced in the area, so this is what I was raised around. So Dia de los Muertos, you know, people still go to the graveyards on the 1st of November, and you decorate the graves, and you honor your ancestors, and people paint up. Not so much in the upper half of the state as the lower, but they still, it's definitely a hard saturation. I've gone to plenty of powwows. I have feathers that have been given to me by shaman to wear and use, and because I'm mixed race, although I did predominantly take after some other ancestors that are more of the white variety, doesn't mean I am one or the other. It's just this is what I was raised around. So I had made some Dia de los Muertos art just a little while back here. I actually had somebody jump my ass and try to report me. Tried to get it taken down off of Facebook, in fact, because they claimed I was culturally inappropriate using it. Oh. Yeah. And I specified to him, number one, I'm an artist. I'm going to make what I want to make. You don't get to censor me just because you don't like what I'm making. Number two, how do you know what my background is?
Yeah.
Just by looking at me, that means you're reading a book for its cover. You're specifically saying because you're blonde, because you're fair-skinned, therefore you can't do this. I'm sorry. That's our current predominant culture was based off of white culture, and that's just because they were dominant at the time. That doesn't mean they're going to be dominant for much longer. But most of us have very heavy mixed backgrounds, areas you were raised around, people you were raised around. I mean, I don't think it's right to tell anybody necessarily, as long as they are not stepping on toes again. I mean, that's the easiest way I can put it. I mean, as long as they're not going out of their way to bash people with it.
Yeah. And if going into it with the idea of exploring the culture and what it tells you about the people born into it and the beliefs that it has can be a part of growing as a person. The ones that people jump on, and rightly so, are the ones that go into it with an expectation and an air of, oh, look at these people and what funny things they do.
Yes, exactly. You put it exactly right.
And that's,
yeah.
I mean, that's when you pull up the Happy Hooligan, when you look at pretty much any depiction of African Americans in America before like the 70s, and even a lot of them after the 70s.
They're painful because they are very obviously saying, oh, look at this strange person. I think this is the way I think of it. It's the difference between going in as a student willing to learn or going in like a kid going to the zoo. When you go in as a student willing to learn, saying, you know, I'm going to make mistakes, but I need to learn about this other way of being human, your culture. I want to learn more. That is appropriate. When you go in and go, ooh, look it, like you're a kid at the zoo, that's not acceptable. And I can speak directly to this because I'm mixed race myself. My family's a cross between Menominee Native American, which is an upper Wisconsin tribe, and Irish. And guess what won on me? The Irish. But I was raised till I was 10 on the Kashana Reservation. And I spent a lot of time seeing tourists of both kinds. You'd see the tourists who came through who were really curious about, how did you make a bark basket waterproof? That's fascinating. And you see the ones who go, can you do that dance for me? I saw it one time, and you just wanted to smack them. And I also got tourists, well-meaning tourists, who would take me by the hand when my grandma's right next to me and say, honey, let's go find your mom. My grandma's right there. And they'd just look, and you'd see the light come on behind their eyes. Oh. And that is the mistake of cultural appropriation, is that it creates little boxes and sticks each culture in and says, this one looks like this. That is not acceptable, because you're essentially saying you can't step outside your box. You are a picture in a book.
Well,
no.
And I will say, I'm only mixed race if we count that far enough back my ancestors came out of the Middle East, because I'm Jewish, and we go and far enough back that we know. But we've been not Middle Eastern for a very long time, and so I understand that there are people that are frustrated, that look in the world and say, well, 10 years ago I could say this, I could dress like this, I could do this, and it was fine. What changed? I understand people being confused by that, but at the same time, you have to look at yourself and realize that's the cost of having been blind to the problems of appropriation to this point. And
oh, you go ahead.
I was going to say, and accept that the standards for being a good person in modern society are, by their very nature, moving goalposts, and that no one is ever going to be perfect, but that if you want to be a good person in modern society, you have to be willing, when challenged on this kind of thing, to not instinctively respond, no, you're wrong, this is fine.
Yes. But you're bringing up a point that I've been thinking about a lot lately. I feel like the pendulum has swung, and that's great, because in the old movies and the old comics, you were basically a flat cutout stand-in for your culture. If you were Indian, you could sniff the ground and tell how many horses had been there.
Yeah.
If you were Chinese, then you talked funny and you wore pigtails. But I feel like the pendulum has swung too far the other way, to the point where we can't talk about each other's culture at all without, oh, you're appropriating, oh, you're doing this, oh, you shouldn't do that. So we're going to limit ourselves, and we're going to start in a new way minimizing our contact with other cultures? No, that's not what we need to do right now. As a culture, that's what we need to do.
Being that we're just right after Halloween here, not too long, there's always that appropriation idea comes up, especially from the idea of, for instance, one of the articles I saw back during Halloween was Indian headdresses.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, Olivia? You know,
Yeah.
the headdresses and the Indian outfits and whatnot. Some people were wearing for Halloween, and how some people were saying, "Oh, that's an insult to their culture." It's Halloween, guys. Most Native
And we dress like
Americans
ancient.
I know of that live on the reservation now, including some of my family, have just looked at it and said, it's silly, but whatever, you know. Because in the end, they're not doing it to step on anybody. They're doing it for one night. They're having a little bit of fun. And, you know, and they're not actually stepping on one particular group's feet per se, except they're saying they're Native American, you know. But other than that, it's not like a particular tribe or, you know.
And to go back to what you're saying, to use your analogy, some people have toes as big as all outdoors. Some people are just looking to be self-righteous. And I am all for standing up for, no, you can't just take my totem pole and use it because you think it's pretty. But I'm really sick of, on the other hand, well, you can't use any form of Inuit art because that's sacred. I'm pointing out Inuit because there's been a lot of stuff in the news about this one guy who goes around deviant art, essentially hacking anybody who does any form of Inuit art, and he says he's a hacktivist. And that's bullshit. And I have Tlingit friends and Inuit friends who are saying, I want to kill this guy. I mean, in jest. But, you know, somebody throttle him, please. Because if you can't talk about other people's cultures, if you care at all, then you get back into that mutual distrust, mutual hatred that we had to fight our way out of all through the 60s. And we're finally getting closer to getting out of it.
We're still in it, you know. We're still in it with the overall the gay agenda, as they like to call it, you know. I mean, there's always going to be that idea of the other, you know, if it's religion, if it's culture, if it's sexual orientation now.
That ridiculous level of self-righteousness will just push us backwards. It's not helping your culture. It's just making you look like a self-righteous ass.
So instead of approaching people and telling them, you know what, you're a fucking idiot, you're wrong, approach them with learning and respect and maybe help them understand what they're stepping on, and approach with education, you know. Approach with a book, approach with a article or something like that saying, you know what, I'm sorry, I believe you're stepping on it and this is why. Maybe you could do something to temper that.
Yeah.
You know, it's just one of those ideas that there is a small level that you could be really stepping on things, but it is very low. It honestly is.
Well, and I mean, we can all come up with Halloween costumes that would cross the line.
Oh yeah.
I mean, if I see someone, you know, bent over with a hooked nose and a bag of gold and you know, if I see an evil Jew costume, I'm gonna have a problem with that. Olivia, if you saw a costume where it was, you know, someone dressed up as a Native American with a blonde blow-up doll that they were abducting.
I actually get more angry on St. Patrick's Day because nobody talks about cultural appropriation then.
Well,
cultural appropriation then than any other time. And cultural appropriation.
Yeah, but I think it absolutely is that we need to have some room for levity on Halloween, so long as, again, you're not crossing that line.
Yeah.
And you're willing to have that conversation if someone comes up to you with a book and someone comes up to you and says, here's my problem with that you're willing to take the steps to say, okay, I have an obligation to listen to this because this is what I chose to do.
Exactly. I think you're right. The problem comes up when people stop talking to each other and start yelling at each other.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people who come from, non-European cultures get tired of tour guiding, where they have to, having to explain it constantly. And I get that to some level, although Judaism is much more exposed than a lot of other cultures. The number of times I've been asked if I worship Satan because I'm wearing a Star of David. I understand that gets tiring, but at the same time, everyone has things that they have to tour guide for.
Well, yeah.
If you have a cause, if you have any kind of background different from Hollywood normal, then I think taking that time and that patience to teach, and taking the time and patience to learn when someone wants to teach you, are the only ways that we can have a meaningful conversation about it.
You got it.
Overall, I agree. I think people have become too sensitive. At least current groups, current mentalities have just become too overly sensitive to the ideas of stepping on other people. And you can't make a joke about the president, or you can't make a joke about the just there's levels to everything. Yes, it swung one way, and that little pendulum has literally swung to the very far side. It'll find its medium again. I think we just have to be aware. Overall, it's okay to make fun of something, as long as you're doing it with the idea of there's a reason why maybe that something is wrong. I got into a very heated discussion the other day with somebody actually using a Jewish reference. There's a meme going around right now with a lovely little rabbi on it, and he talks, and the little meme's talking about hypocrisy of other people's actions versus, his own. And I just put that up on Facebook as a little haha, basically, because it is correct. If you're acting one way, somebody's acting the other, there's something going on there. Maybe you should pay attention. It was to open up your eyes more than anything. I got into a heated discussion with a certain family member about the fact that I wasn't being a good Christian.
Okay.
Gotten the same sort of lecture about, you shouldn't be acting white. Like, I feel like pulling up my sleeve and going, Grandma? But it's that whole thing of what she's saying actually is, you shouldn't be disagreeing with me when I bash other people. And, no, I'm not putting up with that. And it's that same situation. I think a lot of people haven't gotten past the growth level of, I've said it, now it's true. Just because you agree doesn't mean it's true, and we all have to remember that.
Oh, it's like assuming that everything on the internet's right.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Crazy.
It's just one of those things. Appropriation, it's just, I get really heavily influenced, especially by a lot of art from other religions. For instance, the Buddha. There are some fantastic and beautiful depictions of the Buddha. And the art styles used and the artists that used it, and you can really be influenced by something like that, and it'll really show up heavily in your work, or even you'll outright make some, just, and again, you'll have people, and you'll always have somebody disagree with you. That's never a reason to stop making, stop writing. Again, I wasn't doing it out of disrespect, and I know several people who are speaking up, not necessarily to be disrespectful, but they thought I was still wrong to make it to begin with because I'm not a Buddhist.
So I
Well,
wanted to make the point that, oh, I'm sorry. You go
Oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
I
No,
was
go
just
ahead.
Well, I wanted to make the point that if we want to fight cultural appropriation in a healthy way, what we need to do is support the comics that are doing it, that are either showing cultures as they really are, or doing cultural appreciation. So I'm going to put up two links. One is to Comic Republic, which is a Laos-based comic group, and one is Native Realities Press. And they both have a wide variety of mixed race and racially diverse staff, but they're supporting Native American and African stories specifically, and showing those mythologies and those cultures in storytelling. And if we want to fight that kind of attitude that we don't like, then what we need to be doing, like I said, is fighting the lack of these real stories instead of just picking up and yelling at people that we don't agree with. So stop fighting amongst yourselves and go out and tell the stories that need to be out there so that cultural appropriation stops existing, because everybody knows what real cultural appreciation and adaptation is. I think that's both the links. Oh, no, I posted one twice. Apologies.
That's right.
Emma,
All right, there we go.
I don't.
well, and it's the Buddhist thing was interesting because I lived in Thailand for a year and a half, and I wanted to have something traditionally Thai that represented that time because it was a very transformative time in my life and something that I wanted to remember. And so I did the research and I found a traditional Thai Buddhist tattoo that I then had done in the modern fashion because I will admit that I am way too much of a wuss for traditional Thai tattoos.
Oh, God, yeah.
Because that involves monks and ink mixed with snake venom as an antibacterial and steel rods. And I am not nearly
a long time doing it.
And I am not nearly that hardcore. But I went through the steps to research what was a traditional and meaningful tattoo to the people that I had grown to love in the time that I spent there. And the reaction of all of the Thai friends that I had that I showed it to were they were very impressed, both because it is a very well technically done tattoo and because I wanted something that was traditional. And I think that that's the difference. If you going into a tattoo parlor and saying, put the word for love in Thai on my shoulder, although even that, I mean, if you're doing it as almost merchandising, if you're doing something like that as a souvenir, if you're painting it just to cash in, then that's disrespectful. But if you are doing it from the goal of honoring something, whether or not it was yours to begin with, honoring something that you have become a part of or want to become a part of or just want to represent well, then I think we need to we need to acknowledge that as being legitimate. And if you do it wrong, like if I had brought a design to some of my friends and they had said, no, that's not really, there are no dolphins in this, I don't know why it looks like a middle school girl's trapper keeper. If I had done that, then that would be, I should take that upon myself to accept that. And to say that if I'm going to do it, I need to be able to accept the criticism to be able to do it right.
Yes.
So if you're writing or you're drawing a culture and someone writes in and says, I'm Native American, I'm Romani, I'm whatever, and this is what we really do and this is a better representation, take that as an opportunity to grow. Take that as an opportunity to be more inclusive and bring that in.
I think you hit
Definitely.
the difference is research.
Yeah.
You just go, oh, that's pretty. I want to draw an Aztec princess. What should she wear? Instead of going, I want to draw an Aztec princess. Where can I get the research that I need to figure this out? That's the difference between cultural appreciation and cultural appropriation. I explore this a lot with my comic Parmesan because I use a lot of influences from India, from the Tuareg tribe, and from the Romani, specifically the Dome, to shape one of the main cultures that I work with, and I'm always afraid that I'm going to do it wrong. Granted, I'm writing fantasy, so I have a fair amount of license there where I can say, these are the influences, and in my comic, I list these are the influences I draw from. But I'm writing a fantasy, so this culture is shaped in this way by the world that they live in. So it will not be an exact culture, and it shouldn't be. And if it's a thinly veiled analog, you've got a problem. But if you have a reason that your fantasy is the way it is, if you thought about it, then it's going to be a lot more powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, again, you emphasize research there. That's the biggest focus. Trying not to emphasize an other, using elements out of, different ideas, different cultures, different, art to then incorporate into yours, I don't think is disrespectful at all.
No, I don't think it is either. And I think we should, recognizing that the vast majority of comic creators in the industry today, especially professionally, I think obviously the numbers are a lot better online and in independent creators, but professionally the majority of artists and writers in the comics industry are still white men. Encouraging them to do work to research and understand other cultures and represent them in comics is a first step toward them desiring more representation in the writers and artists that they work with, is a step towards having a more genuinely representative comics industry, both in the comics and in the industry itself. That it's okay for a creator of any race or any gender to write characters of any race or any gender, so long as they do it from that perspective of embracing differences and representing cultures truthfully.
Exactly.
Or as truthful as you can, anyways.
Exactly. And knowing from the outset that you're going to get things wrong and that you are beholden to fixing them when you can and acknowledging them when you can't. But committing yourself to doing it regardless, because stories are better when they have more people and more backgrounds in them.
Yeah. There's an old writing rule that says, write what you know, but way too many people think, and this goes for all forms of art, but especially in comics, they say, write what you know, and my response is, okay, learn more, know more. Too many people say, that means I can only draw this. I have to draw less because I don't know. No, learn more. Please learn more. And that's my take on the whole situation is keep expanding our knowledge. Stop limiting our abilities because we don't know enough. If you don't know enough, go learn it.
It's true.
Well, and it is every bit as old a writing of the rule. Keats gave us the idea of negative capability. The ability for him, a poet, or for us, a writer, an artist, a creator of any kind, to create beyond their own context. and by doing so to change their own context and the context of the people who perceive and experience their work. And if we only write what we know, we never get that.
It was 1950s.
Yeah.
People wrote exactly what they already knew, and it was double.
Yeah.
Let me give you guys an example. Something I've noticed that no one's batted an eye at, but I find it highly almost humorous in its appropriation. The Japanese specifically. Harajuku, in the district of Harajuku, there's a large amount of artists, a large amount of fashion designers, and they're always borrowing from other cultures and appropriating it into their styles, their art, fashion, their society. And nobody seems to say anything about it. Nobody poo-poos them for it, at least nobody I've ever heard. And I find it highly humorous that people will speak up anytime it's somebody who's a lot of times American doing it. Oh, look at that buffoon, idiot American doing this. You were doing the same thing.
Well, and there was an interview, and I wish I could find it now, but someone, sorry about that little blare of noise, someone who is of Japanese descent interviewed, I think it was like their grandfather, and asked, what do you think of Westerners dressing up in kimono in Japan? And he basically said, I don't care. And Japanese is a great Japan is a great example to look at and see a culture that is on the surface so homogenous that we think, oh, Japan is Japan and has always done Japan's thing, but at the same time, a number of things that we associate with Japan are actually items of cultural appropriation. Tempura comes from Portuguese cooking techniques. Without cultural trading, you would never be able to go into a Japanese restaurant and eat shrimp tempura.
Shrimp.
Exactly. I mean, it's no culture, no matter how xenophobic, unless or isolationist, unless we are talking about literally uncontacted groups of people in the most remote locations on the planet. No culture has gotten where it is completely on its own, completely pure of its own culture. The mixes have gone all over the world, 1,000 different ways, and in ways that are probably now lost to history. We live in a time when we can see it. And when we,
as humans, we're... Oh, sorry, my connection gave out.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Okay. As humans, we are magpies, and we take things and we put them together in new ways to build our worldview. And that, people think it's horrible these days. That's the strength of the way our brains work, is that we can make connections between disparate things. We can make patterns out of chaos, out of information that we pulled from here, there, and everywhere. And sometimes, sometimes you get it wrong. But a lot of times that's what creates beautiful things like Japan's art district, like downtown New York. It's a million different cultures from a million different places coming together and interacting and acting like the warp and woof on a piece of cloth. That's what makes us human, is making these connections. Without it, we're just smart animals. And not even that smart. We don't survive too well alone.
Definitely not. Overall, I think this has been a pretty good discussion. I mean, I honestly don't think there's too much wrong with appropriating. I honestly don't. As long as you're doing it with a certain idea of respect, not as a way to poke at others, almost in a propaganda sense. You'll see lots of older examples of that propaganda idea. Hell, we could still probably find some now. But they're just far less. But you know, it's just a way to alienate others in the end. And you know, I don't think, as long as somebody's not doing it out of that way to promote negativity, I just don't see it as necessarily wrong. You know, somebody wearing hip-hop fashion that's, for instance, white, maybe that's just the style they're drawn to. I don't necessarily agree with it. I might think they look silly, but that doesn't mean I have a right to speak up and be a dick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we've been talking as a culture about love is for everybody, and that's in specific cases. But I think this should go for cultural appreciation too. We should be okay with falling in love with another culture, falling in love with people from wherever, ideas from wherever, because that's what makes our art rich. That's what makes our thoughts rich, and that's what makes our writing rich, is when we have many ideas from many sources. So like you said, as long as people are not being used as exhibits or as window dressing or as the stand-in for their entire race,
Yeah.
then yes, they cannot be used as essentially dolls to stand in for their race.
Yeah.
That looks like diversity on the outside, but that's appropriation. And as long as you don't do one of those three things or be a complete douchebag, you're good.
Exactly.
And I want to make this too, but all three of us are Americans. We're from everywhere. And to say it out straight, being American is about being from a mix of a million cultures. That's who we are. And that's the strength we have, is we all came together and we all pulled through.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. And, you know, I've heard a number of people poo-poo being American. You know, you don't have to necessarily agree with your current administration in order to still be a good American. Same as any other, you know, nationality. Overall, I found I'm proud. You know, I'm happy being mixed race. I am happy learning about others and trying to keep that part of my mind open. You know, that part of my heart open. Because there's no point in closing it down.
There is beauty that we can find in every culture on the planet. Every culture that has ever walked the earth, I think, has had hopes and dreams and beautiful things that we can appreciate and we can learn from and we can integrate into who we are as humanity. And we do a disservice to ourselves as humans when we say that I cannot love another person's culture and I cannot write about people from another person's culture and I cannot draw the things from another person's culture. Like Olivia said, so long as it's done with that love, I love seeing things. If someone wanted to write, wants to write about the Jewish experience in America or anywhere in the world, I don't care if they're Jewish or Muslim or Baptist or a Martian, so long as they're approaching it with love and respect. And I will read that, I will, whether, book or comic book, and I will appreciate them for taking the time to try to get it right.
I think the best person who ever got it right was probably Craig Thompson, who did Habibi. And if you've seen that work, it delves into the depths of what it means to be human, but also the depths of the Moorish culture and a lot of old Sephardic ideas.
Yeah.
Delves into alchemy, delves into this culture to such a depth that you feel like you are a part. And this creator is from Podunk, America.
Yeah.
And this is what I love about comics, is that we can take in these ideas and mix them and learn about them and take them in and then show them in a new way that people want to look at. I mean, when you read Habibi, you can't immediately look at someone else with a different skin color and hate them because that story has lodged somewhere in your heart. Those images are in your heart now. When you look at, like you guys were talking about, when you look at the new Wonder Woman, you can't hate that culture immediately. When you look at someone who looks different and you realize that they're as human as you are because of the art that you've seen and the literature that you've seen, then that literature has done its work. And that's why we need to, whatever culture we're from, we need to keep creating art from many different cultures because it makes you look at someone else, remember that story, and remember, I am human and so are you.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. All right, guys. Well, I think we've had a good discussion on this. Let's go ahead and wrap it up here a little bit. For this month's recommendations, Matt, since you are our newest, would you like to throw down your recommendation first?
Recommendation for what to read on this topic, or just something to look at in general?
Doesn't matter.
For this topic, I would say that the links that I've sent, there's the article on Salon, Why I Can't Stand White Belly Dancers, and then an article on The Atlantic in praise of polyglot culture and multicultural belly dancing is a great look at it from multiple sides. If you are just looking for something to read, obviously I would prefer if it was Border Kansas, but if it can't be that, I have just finished reading Brandon Sanderson's new Mistborn book, The Shadows of Self, and I'm over the moon for it. If you haven't picked up the Mistborn series, I would highly recommend it, because it's making me super happy.
I also recommend to anybody that is writing or aspiring to write, go on YouTube. Brandon Sanderson put up all his lectures, his writing lectures up on there for free.
Because he's a professor at like BYU.
Yeah,
Brigham Young University.
Thank you, Brigham Young.
You're welcome.
I was raised Mormon. I should know the damn name. And it was so funny because, like, in some of the lectures, he talks. You can see him talking in the background, going, "God damn it! How many extra students do I have today?"
That's what happens.
Because people would sneak into his lectures, and fill the whole classroom, and he literally had to start kicking people out just because his students that had paid for the class didn't have a seat.
Didn't have seats. Nice.
Yeah, so he was having to kick people out, so he told everybody that what he would do instead was at least record one semester's worth of story lecture, including some of his guests that came. Oh, man, it's fantastic. So if anybody wants to go on YouTube there and go on a YouTube binge on writing specifically by Brandon, it's great.
Have you got a link to that by any chance?
Yes. I will throw links in the doobly-doo for everybody on that one. Miss Olivia, do you have any recommendations yourself?
I will recommend read anything by the Comic Republic, which is the African group that I was talking about. It takes African mythology and makes it accessible for us comic readers who don't want to read this thick sociology book. And it makes it real, and it makes it part of our lives. So that's what I'd suggest. And they're hilarious and fun. So go for it.
Very nice. All right, my recommendation this month is a webcomic. It's only been going on for a little over 3 years now. It's on the Hive Works network. It's called Saint for Rent, saintforrent.com. This is just a well-drawn, really cute story about an innkeeper who happens to also be a saint. So I don't want to spoil it very much for people. I just like giving the basics on it. The art style is wonderful. I mean, I'm in love with the site design too. It's really clean and simple, but really nice. So, all right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming and
Thank you.
hanging out. And
Feel better.
yes, yes. Apologies to everybody. That's why I've been drinking so much water. I've got bronchitis, and the inhaler. Yeah, basically, I'm living off of water and inhaler alone. So thank you so much for stopping by. I appreciate it, guys. My name's Melony. I'm your main host today from Ornamental Comics at ornamentalcomics.com. With me was Olivia from Parmesan. I just had it. Okay, parmesan.webcomic.ws. And our special guest today, Matthew Parker of BorderKansas.com. And his nonfiction work, for anybody who wants to read it, is DishonorOnYourCow.com, which I love the name.
I call it the best named website on the internet.
Yes.
Yes, definitely. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for stopping by.
Thank you for having me.
Yep. Talk to everybody later. If you have any questions or comments, down in the doobly-doo, or you can hit us up on Twitter, the Trade Comic Podcast, or myself, Melony_C. And of course, you can always find us on Facebook. Just throw our name in the little search bar. You can go ahead and definitely find it. Thanks for stopping, guys. Take care. Bye.
Bye.